Hello and welcome to Shite Talk, an Irish history podcast. This week's episode we had Andrew Dorman telling us about the 18th century Irish army, which also happens to be the subject of his thesis, which I think he's defending publicly soon, in the next couple of weeks, so we should all go and ask him difficult questions. He'd love it. Andrew's a very talented comedian and also possibly the most educated man we've had on the show so far, which is saying a lot with the caliber of people that we've had on the show. But that's it for an introduction. The usual stuff. Patreon, you can give us a rating if you want. Follow Andrew on social media and enjoy this episode.
Gather around now, you're in for a story. Old tales of lore, all in search of a glory. The history and mystery of lads, lasses and all. Discoveries and voyages, the rise and the fall. Follow me now as we go back in time. We trace the steps of Irish lineage to find. Joseph from Carlisle and Kevin the Dog. Guide you through the ways of Shite.
I'd say, yeah, it's starting at 2, which is fairly. That's lunchtime.
That's
You've already
lunchtime,
sort of
yeah.
missed brunch.
But where's the
yeah.
lunch? Where's the line between lunch and brunch? And where's the line between brunch and day drinking?
I don't know. I know Lisa messaged me before, texted me being like, "Oh, I'm waiting to meet the girls for brunch." She was like, "It's 6:00. You're not."
Yeah. I think the line's somewhere between. It's like what receptacle you're drinking it from.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas if it's like a pint, then you're day drinking. If it comes in like a flute,
Then it's brunch.
that's
right.
brunch.
And I
If-
suppose the food is
Yeah. Well, not even if you're paying, because you can have a packet of Teo crisps. You're still day drinking. But if you're paying €16 for like a badly poached egg, then it's
yes,
brunch.
yeah,
And now you're enjoying yourself.
egg salmonella
Yeah.
on toast.
I think it depends how many times you get interrupted during your meal to get a photo opportunity.
Yep.
Now, we're all talking. Have any of us ever been to one of these prosecco brunches?
Oh yeah. I've been
Oh,
to
yeah.
brunch in Boleyn before.
Oh, okay. How much are we talking? Is it unlimited prosecco?
It was back when I had money, so I didn't
Just-
keep
yeah,
track of
just-
these things.
yeah.
Now I couldn't afford to go into the bit. I'll find out today. I'll go in. I'll be picking up people's receipts when they drop them at the table.
Taking photos, put it up on Twitter.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a paid gig then.
yeah. Well, shit. Actually, I don't know. I assume it's paid. Or maybe I'll just get paid in eggs
Or prosecco.
or prosecco. Yeah, I'm trying to stop drinking now. As of last Monday,
How's
I
that
had
going?
1 pint on Friday,
Mm-hmm.
and I had 1 pint yesterday.
Nice. Where were you yesterday?
The Glen Harlow.
Ah.
It's
Have you tried their special brew yet? They're the
no.
no.
No, I have not. Myself and Lisa went in there yesterday, and it's a cash only bar, so you can just bring a tenner, and then after a drink, you have to go home.
That's a good system.
It's good. It's good to have a system around drinking. That's always helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, systematic drinking is far better than randomly allocated.
Yeah.
Well, my system of
Or
the
to have limits set in.
well, I went to an unlimited. I should say no, it's definitely limited, but I guess you can drink as much as you want at a prosecco brunch in St. Louis, in Missouri, and I think it was like $10 or $15, and you could just drink as much as you want within that 2-hour window. But they didn't like specify that you had to eat while that was happening.
Yeah.
So they were like, "Oh yeah, people will pay this much, and then we'll make more money on top of the food." And everyone I went with ate, but I was like, "No, you just told me it was like 10 or 15 quid for as much as I could drink in 2 hours." So I had a system.
Yeah.
It was like every 10 minutes I want another glass
Yeah,
because they had 4 different flavors. So I just wanted to get at least like 3 of each of them.
But it's usually really watered down.
No,
Stepped on. Oh, really?
no.
The
This,
real,
this was a bar called Pat Connolly's.
I really love when like the likes of Pat Connolly's getting onto the brunch.
Yeah.
I used to have like bottomless Bellini Sundays during lockdown, where I just take off my trousers and drink a bottle of Bellini.
what am I? Oh no, those are blinis. I was very confused there.
I don't know what a Bellini is. I think it's a mix of something and something. Is it?
He used to play up front for Italy.
Well, I think
Oh,
a blini is a small pancake that French people put like prawns and stuff on. Or is am I
Oh.
thinking of something else?
Like a crepe?
No, not a crepe. But like you get
I think you're thinking of a crepe.
no, you get packets of them in the
No, it's a
supermarket.
crepe.
A crepe.
Is what-
Yeah,
You get packets of them.
yeah, you get. I remember when I was doing research in Paris and living in like this god awful like rent an apartment place. There was a shop down the road that sold packets of pancakes. So for breakfast on the Sunday, I bought a jar of Nutella and a packet of tiny pancakes, and had a very sad breakfast on my own.
For some reason, when you said doing research in Paris, I just imagined you in a trench coat with binoculars on a balcony somewhere, just being like, "There's another one."
So we should probably introduce our guest for the day.
Yes.
Yes, Andrew Dorman.
Hi.
Yes.
PhD candidate or Dr. Andrew Dorman?
Hopefully doctor by this summer.
Okay.
2022.
That's
I
hopeful.
submit on June 13th, so I'm almost there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah. Do you want to give us a rundown of what your doctorate's about?
Yeah, I
No doctor candidate's ever said no. I'm all right.
you know what? I'm good.
I don't want to talk about it.
It's just everyone else has already heard about it, so I'm just so excited.
Yeah.
I am examining the experience of soldiers based in Ireland during the 18th century, specifically. So it's military history, but it's more so looking at the personal side of it and kind of really looking at the army-societal relationship and how society affected the army and how army affected society. So a step back from sort of counting bullets and that kind of admin stuff and looking more at the kind of the personal side of things. So I would say more interesting, but I'm slightly biased over 4 years.
Of course, yeah. No, it is more interesting. No, that's definitely it's a very interesting topic. And you're also a handsome comedian. That's the real reason you're on the show.
Yeah. That's really what I bring to an audio podcast is my handsomeness.
Yeah. Yeah. It comes through in the voice. That's what people
Have you considered
say.
filming for Patreon?
So the episode today is going to be about your PhD interests.
Basically, I suppose. Yeah.
I say this is the first time anyone's ever not had a script in front of them. This
Oh.
is very impressive.
Well, I mean, I'd like to think that after the years of comedy, I'm able to be somewhat off the cuff, but I'm still kind of breaking it.
Oh, listen. I don't know. I was asked to. I'm going to be the officiant at a good friend of mine's wedding soon, and we were going through the rehearsals there the other day, and she was like giving a breakdown of the thing. I was like, right, you know, speak for 5 minutes, and then we'll introduce these things. And I was like, fuck. I still have no concept of how long 5 minutes is.
No.
And like I can't be wearing my shitty Casio watch, like standing on the altar beside the bride and groom, be like, would you just have a beep at 5? Or like, genuinely, my first thought was like, I need someone to flash a light.
Yeah.
Well,
I need someone down the back flashing a light at me to know when to get off.
I know how long 5 minutes is when the first minute doesn't go well. Forever.
Yeah. But obviously I'll be crushing it with all my wedding material.
I got to do one at my brother's wedding, but like everyone did speeches, I guess. But I got to say, Shane, he's always been like a brother to me. And then everyone laughed because like, great wedding joke. Now follow that up with, fuck. Fair play to them now.
You should have just done the Costanza and just been like, that's it for me, and walk off. Go out on a high. I need to write that wedding speech better at some point. But
Yeah, you got time.
I've got about 3 weeks.
Time.
Yeah.
You say wedding speech, is it not that you're officiating? You just have to go like kiss each other.
Yeah, there's a bit more to it in there.
But I'm sure there's a script to go by where it's like you now take.
No, because you've got to replace the whole like, dearly beloved, we're here in the eyes of God. It has to be secular.
Right. Dearly beloved, we're here.
We're here. Yeah.
Leave it at that.
Yeah. Dearly beloved are very loaded terms. It's otherizing. We should just say we're
Both
here.
of you who think each other are fairly
Lads.
okay.
Men. I just gotta. No, I really, really wanted to do because we're both big fans of The Simpsons. I just really want to. I don't know. She'd eventually forgive me. I think in about 10 years if I just went, "Dear beloved, we're here today to join Marge and Homer."
I had a friend over in Texas who did the Independence Day speech as the best man and just changed around one or two little words.
Yeah.
This is not our Shane and Caroline's wedding day.
I think have you seen Pacific Rim?
No, that's the Idris Elba one.
Yeah. His speech in that is surprisingly good. You're talking about cancelling the apocalypse. Not very wedding suitable, but you can change some words.
You can change it around.
I suppose you just throw it out to the crowd. Does anyone have anything to say?
Can you do crowd work?
You don't have to be like, are you all happy to be here? Come on, we can do better. Are you all happy to be here?
Yeah. What brings you to Dublin?
Yeah. Where are you from? How do you, the bride or groom? Oh, probably both. That's just for country weddings.
Yeah.
But I don't know what other speeches could you co-opt to.
I Have a Dream is a bit cliche.
Yeah. I'd like to say, Andy, give the good fight that day.
What about
Fought the sisters.
bushes on the aircraft carrier at the end of the Iraq War?
Yeah,
That's-
we did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. 4 score, 4 whores and 7 beers ago.
Abe drinking.
Hey, drinking. Yeah. I mean, none of this is good, but it could all work.
No, it couldn't.
I was doing a bit recently about, I went to my friend's wedding a couple of months ago, and his best man went up and like gave a really good best man speech. It was like, you know, funny and sad and touching in different bits, and was very well done. And he obviously put an awful lot of work into it. And then the bride's father went up and he was just like 55-year-old, oh, probably 65-year-old Kerry man. And he was just like, she was my little girl. And she always will be. And he just dropped the mic and went like off crying and
Costanza it, man.
killed it. Everyone, not a dry eye in the place. And you can't beat that. And then to follow that up with an actual written speech. But then the same man, it was the day of the Kerry Tyrone match, and the same man was down the back 10 minutes later, like, you know, tapping his foot, but it was fucking kick off. Come on. Come on now. But enough wedding chat.
Yeah.
What about the 1800s?
Yeah. 1700s.
Oh, sorry, 18th century.
Classic. Rookie era.
Rookie era, yeah.
Real undergraduate essay.
Yeah.
It's an annoying period to study, from what I've seen anyway, because really you need to start in the 1690s.
Yeah.
And from my angle, it kind of ends in the 1790s as well, because I would argue that most of the 1790s is 19th century in terms of sort of scope, because everything sort of 1798 and that violent change and everything like that,
Yeah.
you can't really consider that as part of what was going on in the 18th century. It's so completely different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would be insane if historical trends also fit neatly into like centuries.
Yeah, that would be really
It
convenient.
would be extremely convenient, but
Yeah.
You're telling me
unfortunately,
they don't?
I mean, we sort of shoehorned them in, but listen, the 60s died in 1972.
I suppose that's like we find that a lot in the research of this podcast. We're like, oh yeah, and it begins here. Well, technically the roots go back like 1,000 years before that. You're like, well, not in this podcast.
Yeah.
No.
What even we did a whole series on 1690 and the Williamite thing.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, I don't know, the Desmond Revolution, or it's back to like the early 1600s. But yeah, you got to start somewhere. So
yeah, exactly.
the 1690s,
We'll start there.
William
Yeah.
Orange has chased off
Yep.
Jacob,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's time for the Protestant ascendancy.
Yeah. So I'd actually start a little bit prior to that, if I may.
You may.
So during the 1680s, when James takes the throne, he and his minion, Tyrconnell. I don't know.
I thought you were going to replace Lackey with your Lackey is a bit harsh. Minion. That's the same level of disrespect to Talbot.
Yeah, his subordinate,
Yeah.
Tyrconnell, arrives in Ireland, and this is, I mean, there's still fears of Catholic uprisings and such
Yeah.
among the Irish or Anglo-Irish Protestant. Ascendancy isn't probably the best term to use. That's more of a 1780s term, but that demographic,
Yeah.
you know, and they are quite worried about this sort of thing. And then along comes Tyrconnell, and he starts taking the army and making it extremely Catholic.
Yes.
So subbing in Catholic soldiers into the army, taking out Protestant officers, putting in Irish Catholic officers instead.
Yeah.
And this is cause for serious concern.
I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy it wasn't Schomburg. The guy who was in charge of the army at the time, and he was James's cousin, maybe through marriage. And he went over to give out about what Talbot was doing, and James was like, get out of there.
Yeah.
He's like, Talbot's undermining me over in Ireland. I was like, well, maybe he should just have your job.
Yeah. I can't remember the
Yeah.
fella, yeah. So he's mincing his way through the army base and completely
Yeah.
reorganizing it. And there's some protest amongst the soldiers themselves, but they don't really put up too much of an argument. There's some mutiny, but
Yeah.
on the whole, there's not very little they can do. So when the war breaks out, this is seen as, well, this is what happens when you put loads of Catholics into the military. This is a manifestation of all of our fears over the past few years. And when the war ends, Ireland, or the Protestants in Ireland, are terrified that that will happen again.
Yeah.
Hence the establishment of things like the penal laws.
Mm-hmm.
And now the penal laws are pretty controversial. The example I like to use is the very first sentence of the penal law Wikipedia page is wrong, because it says that the penal laws were put in place to force Irish Catholics to convert to Protestantism.
Yeah.
But that's not what they wanted at all, because if everyone converts to Protestantism, you've lost any kind of command and control. And it's very difficult to suppress people who are the same religion as you. It's far easier to suppress a religious
that is true. Yeah.
majority. So
Yeah.
the initial penal laws were put in place.
Well, that's like saying the wealth, like, I don't know, the rich are trying to punish the poor because they want them all to be rich as well. So
Exactly.
That's not what they want.
No, not at all. You want to maintain distance.
Yeah.
So what they were actually put in place to do were to disarm the Catholic population. So the first three, one was to prevent travel to Europe.
Yes.
And that was to stop, creating networks with Jacobite exiles or French soldiers and Spanish military commanders, that
so
kind of thing.
after the flight of the wild geese,
Yeah.
they're all sitting in Europe and primed to come back and fight another.
Yeah. So you're going to want to cut contact with that.
Yes. And what there was, maybe this is maybe 2 or 3, but was the stipulation of that if you left and you were gone for like 2 weeks, they took all your stuff. Like you could leave, but if you didn't come back within a set period of time, it was open season.
Yeah, exactly. So you essentially banning it, because the people who would be going would be the wealthier ones anyway, with something to lose.
Yeah. And I think you could only carry a certain amount of money with you out.
Yeah. Very sort of specific stipulations. That was a
awful
audio term to use. So that's what the other two, the famous one about you can't have a horse over £5.
Yeah.
Value, that's not weight.
Yeah.
And that again makes sense, because a horse of that value, anything more than that,
is that where Shetland ponies came from?
Yeah.
we found a workaround.
Yeah.
It was just kind of a con job. I'm not sure. I think it was to ban any kind of cavalry use, because cavalry in that period, men on horseback, you'd fight in two capacities, either as horse, so physically on the horse, or dragoons, where you dismount. And I think either it would be difficult to do with a cheap horse, because you need a fairly well-bred sort of beast for that. So get rid of their horses, and the last thing was disarm them. You weren't allowed to own a gun.
Yeah.
And that stems right through to the 1790s, the whole Pike Rebellion thing as a legacy of this. So you've disarmed the population, you've dismounted the population, and you're keeping them in Ireland.
Yeah.
So it's got nothing really to do with the spreading of Protestantism or anything like that. It's all, home security, essentially. And this is where the
you never want to get rid of a lower or working class.
No.
Yeah.
Who's going to do the work?
Business.
Yeah. So they, by extension of this, the Irish government agrees to, and volunteers to, in a way, pay for a proportion of the British Army in 1699. So it's agreed that 12,000 men would be garrisoned in Ireland, which was, at that stage, the largest proportion of the British Army. I think you've got maybe 3,000 in Scotland and 8,000 in England.
Yeah.
So Ireland is paying for and housing most of the British Army voluntarily.
I think I always found it I found it funny when we were reading that stuff about the 1690 war. Like, the standing armies seem laughably small nowadays. And that was there was a big thing around, it was undone at the time to have a standing army outside of wartime.
Yeah, for fear of tyranny.
So even after 1690, William was trying to get the armies to go and fight in Europe, and then the government at the time was basically like, the war is done, we are dismembering the army because we don't want them to turn on us.
Yeah.
Which seems like, again, such a weird idea now, just to not have a peacekeeping force in. So even the idea of having 12,000 armed soldiers in a country at a time when there's no active war seems like not that many now. There's probably 12,000 people in the Irish Reserves now.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was crazy.
Yeah. And especially, there is some pushback among particularly like wealthier individuals. Now, it's very difficult to know what the Irish masses felt about it, because the sources don't survive, or often they
weren't writing much.
Yeah, I mean,
no one was asking.
There are
There's
efforts.
a few walls with hieroglyphs in it in Tipperary.
Yeah, just some weird poetry stuff.
Just a big thumbs down.
No one knows what they felt.
But we've determined it from the basis of 3 poems and a haiku.
Yeah. But even in terms of the Irish government at the time, maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but when you say like the Irish government, the Parliament just sort of met.
Yeah.
Every couple of years.
It was pretty consistent, wasn't constant. There were definitely gaps.
Yes. Yeah.
So this Parliament that was meeting semi-regularly, more regularly as the century wore on.
Yeah.
But at that stage, it's still a little bit shaky. Their big concern is security, especially with James still lurking on the horizon with an army.
Yeah.
This is the thing, is you've got 12,000, 16,000 men at James's court in
Yeah.
Saint-Germain waiting to swan over, and 6,000 of them, as the century enters 1710s, begin to prove themselves to be some of the best soldiers in Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, the exploits of the Irish Brigade probably deserve their own episode.
And they'll get it someday.
Yeah.
Well, because at the end of 1690, it ends in not a stalemate, but essentially Patrick Sarsfield is allowed to leave Limerick
Yeah.
with all of the battle-hardened soldiers. And it's not as if it's just like, yeah, the war's over, now you go to Australia. You just go to France.
Yeah.
Like Normandy. So they're about, 20 minutes on a good day away, and they're not resting over there. They're, entering into the armies of Europe and becoming trained generals and commanders.
Yeah.
So that's all just sitting over there. And they all spend the whole time going around singing songs of the old country.
Yeah, exactly. And the old country singing songs praying for their return.
Yeah.
So
It would be right to be a little bit wary.
exactly. And hence they're agreeing, even though standing armies are weird at the time and seen as tyrannical and everything like this. Jonathan Swift, for example, he hated it. He was a staunch anti-army sort of advocate. But they thought this is worth it, for home security. So the army's three main objectives in its establishment is to prevent foreign invasion, first and foremost, to suppress internal uprising, and then thirdly, it's to be a reserve for British service. So you can keep them in Ireland. It's not technically the British payroll, so they don't have to worry about it financially. And we can, because we lord over them, draw them out and deploy them elsewhere as we need to. And those objectives do come into conflict kind of later on in the century. But that sort of sets the scene as to what's going on.
Very good. Oh, so that is a nice workaround. So I remember, at the end of the war, William kind of he wanted to move all the armed forces into Europe to fight whatever wars he was fighting there.
The War of the League of Augsburg.
Yes, the League of Augsburg Boys. And
Great
the Parliament. The great name.
Great,
Yeah. Yeah, because what was the 7 year, I don't know, one of the many year wars.
9, I think.
Yeah.
But there's another 9 years war in Ireland,
Yeah.
which is far more entertaining.
Yeah, sure.
It's before they'd realised they should put better names on the war.
Yeah.
Let's just go for time. That's it.
Yeah.
And even then, they don't even get that right. The 100 Years' War is 118 years long.
Yeah. Well, no one could remember back that far.
No, yeah.
But they were the original people who wanted to bookend wars by centuries.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the parliamentarians, they held the purse, and they wanted to dissolve the army. So they've come up with a situation where they've convinced the Irish gentry to pay for a standing army. So it's only coming from Ireland taxation, and the Parliament can call on it in England at any time they want to use it to fight the Dutch.
Yeah.
Or fight for the Dutch, as it was.
Exactly.
That's
And
brilliant.
it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's a beautiful workaround.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately for Ireland, it's by a long shot their most expensive thing throughout the century.
Oh, yeah, I'd
most of the
imagine so.
income goes towards paying for this.
Yeah.
But it's then thought, okay, how do we deal with the fact that we now have 12,000 men on our payroll? Standard practice at the time was to house them in taverns and inns and pubs, and if push came to shove, with the local population. But that was deemed a bad idea.
Why ever would that be?
I mean, the Catholic majority putting the army in with them.
Yeah.
That's putting weapons quite close to people you don't want to have weapons with.
Well, I was thinking bringing
yeah.
the pub. Like,
What?
it's a horrible.
Well, it was also there weren't enough pubs, which is a shocking.
Still a problem today.
Yeah. I've listened to the workings of Richie Kavanagh. I know his opinions about the number of pubs in this country.
Yeah.
But this is jumping ahead about 80 years. When was the American War of Independence?
1776.
1776. I remember reading a lot of stuff. Whenever the amendments were made, a lot of that stuff comes from this period in Irish history. Because a lot of the descendants of the Protestant ascendancy went over to America and were like, all right, well, the Second Amendment, bear arms.
Yep.
The Third Amendment is that troops should be allowed to garrison in your house or tavern or wherever.
Yeah.
Which is one they don't talk about as much, but
Yeah.
the right to bear arms came from this period where the Catholics were kind of trying to do the opposite of what they saw the English had done decades before, taking away weapons from the people they're trying to oppress.
Yeah, and there's always the fear that if there was a Catholic surge, Protestants would need to take up arms, and it's Protestants typically that would form the American sort of higher ups.
Yeah.
So you can trace it directly.
The only way to combat a Catholic with a gun is a Protestant with a gun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially when you've taken away the Catholics' guns, then it's way easier.
Then the Protestants have 2 guns.
Yeah, exactly. One for each hand. So they decide, given these issues with not enough pubs, which again, well, travesty, they opt for creating a system of barracks throughout the country. And Ireland ends up with the first comprehensive and modern barracks network in Europe.
Okay.
Over 100 are built throughout the country. Most are concentrated on the coast for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
They don't really believe in a defense in depth. They put the military on the coast.
The obvious reasons
Yeah.
is that they want to stay away from the countrymen that live in Meath.
And also invasion, but mainly.
Mainly, like, you know.
I mean, have you been to these inner country
Yeah,
counties?
did you want to go to Cork, Galway, Belfast, or Athlone?
Yeah, there was a substantial garrison in Athlone, but that's a story
Yeah.
for another day. So you get these barracks being built and of varying quality, but they kind of define the Irish experience in that regard, because unlike in England where they were still sometimes quartered among the population, in Ireland you were kept away from them. Regiments were split up to fill these barracks, so you'll have a couple of companies from each regiment, maybe 100 men or so assigned to a barrack, usually about 8 to a room, and the rooms maybe about 20 by 21 feet, so pretty cozy.
Yeah.
Hostel sized.
Yeah, exactly. But at the other end of the scale, from the soldier side of things, it's not that bad a get up, compared to sleeping in a tent or being put up in some country lad's farmhouse. It's pretty opulent.
Well, again, just going back to the 1690, a lot of how that ended up was just that the Williamite forces just fucking couldn't stake another winter in Ireland because they were stuck in tents and just in bogs. So I guess the ideas of being inside an actual garrison,
It's pretty
8
appealing.
men, bunk beds,
Yeah.
bit of fire, bit of crack, sounds
Yeah.
ideal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they still were attached to towns, so you can still engage with them and get the food you want and the drink you want mostly.
Yeah.
But it also helped the kind of their initial objectives, because for 1690s, 1710s, most of what they're doing is mopping up kind of leftover insurgencies and dealing with the Revenue Commission. So Revenue Commission's their primary job was collect tax, stop smuggling, tip over whiskey stills, these kind of really popular activities.
Of course.
Yeah, there was a lot of backlash, so they needed a military escort. So it was really handy to have pockets of garrison dotted everywhere in the country for you to just dip into. Oh, can I borrow 12 men? I need to go out and push over some whiskey stills on the coastline.
Yeah.
Sure. We've heard rumors that French recruiters are coming in. Can we stop them? Yeah, absolutely. Here's 25 soldiers or something like that.
Yeah.
So for this early stage, they're kind of just operating as like enforcers.
What was their problem with the whiskey still?
You're missing out on proper revenue. Like, we could charge for that.
Yeah,
It's illegal.
But you think then to just find a way to charge it instead of tipping them over?
Well,
if you saw an illegal substance being used by the general populace, instead of just trying to crack down on it, you could legalize it and then tax it.
Potentially,
This is being recorded 2 days after 420 as well. But that was their attitude to it then as well.
Yeah.
Just knock over whiskey stills.
Yeah, and monopolize it in sort of state-sanctioned production. And it's quite interesting reading the British soldiers kind of trying to understand Irish drinking culture, because they just can't fathom it. So one officer, a chap called Diet, thought that the reason why the Irish loved the drink so much was because potatoes were too easy to grow, so they had too much spare time. So why not set up a whiskey still? And there was another chap.
A man called Trevelyan was like, I've got a solution to that.
Yeah. And there's another fella who thought that the reason people had to drink, now he was a soldier and he was more commenting on his fellow soldiers and their incessant drinking, was that service in Ireland was so catastrophically boring that all you could do was sit around and tell stories, and everyone had heard all the stories already, so you need drink to make them interesting.
Okay.
So there's all kind of these different competing theories about what may or why the Irish drank so much.
I love these 18th century hot takes.
Yeah. I mean, but it basically boils down to it was boring and life's too easy.
Yeah.
I'd argue with one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, have they never tried drink themselves? Like,
Oh,
that's the obvious reason why we like to drink so much,
Yeah.
is because it's great.
It's
Yeah.
class.
Well, I think 18th century whiskey is probably a different beast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Much
blinding.
Yeah, well, I
1950s
mean,
Guinness.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about like why would the government knock over these unsanctioned stills? They don't want to get like full nanny state, but there was a good chance it was killing men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was there's a doctor's report from the 1780s where he's complaining about having to deal with regiments which are raised in Ireland because the soldiers have horrible ulcers on their legs from excessive drinking. And there's this wonderful quote where he says that the surgeon's work of 4 months can be undone by an afternoon in a tavern.
Which is true today, even.
I mean, we've got fewer ulcers on the legs, I'd like to think, but
Yeah.
it kind of gives an indication of the quality of alcohol they're drinking.
Yeah.
We'll just wait now. The summer's coming. Wait till the lads wearing shorts. We'll
I
see the
don't
state
know.
of the nation.
I don't know how much detail to put in this, but a friend of mine works as a doctor, and they were saying they were trying to convince. They spent a lot of like yesterday trying to convince someone to stay in the bed who had liver damage, and your man just wanted to go for a drink, and his logic was like, "I'll be back in 2 hours." So your liver doesn't work. You will die. You will die if you drink. He's like, I can have one or two. That's just like a medical opinion. I'll be back in a bit. You know, so it's good to see the things haven't changed even 400 years on.
Not a slight.
No.
No. I think because what that report kind of hints to, and it's something that a lot of people tend to forget, is that the army, the British, heavy quotation marks behind that.
Yeah, you get into
Yeah,
quick
again,
difficulty in these times. You're trying to like, what is British, Irish?
yeah, because they're still separate kingdoms, so it's the kingdom
Yes.
of Ireland and Britain. But the army that's in Ireland is more Irish than one might expect. You're talking maybe 20-25% of them would be Irish. At a time when Irishmen weren't supposed to be in the army, it was banned of any religion.
Oh, okay.
So the theory was, for Catholics, pretty self-explanatory. Why the hell would you give the scary Catholics military training?
Of course, yes.
For Protestants, the theory was, well, we need them to keep them on the island. And given the fact that we ship out a lot of regiments for service elsewhere, as per objective number 3, we can't afford to lose them. So let's keep Protestants in the country, and they can join the militia if they want. But
what would have classified someone as Irish as opposed to Anglo-Irish? Like how many generations?
that's a very good question. And
Yeah.
Irish identity has a huge question mark over in this period.
Sure.
It's layers of grey.
Because we did ask people in Cork, how many generations do you have to be there? Because I said that there was a guy who was like 3rd generation Cork. They're like, he doesn't count.
Yeah.
He's a blow-in.
Yeah. My friend was introducing us to her girlfriend there a while ago, and I don't know, someone said blow in the conversation. She was like, I've been listening to, she was German, and she's like, I've been listening to West Cork podcast, and they talk about what is a blow in? Like, yeah, how many generations do you have to go back?
In relation to that, it actually does mean like all of the English who moved out to West Cork.
Oh, sure.
Because in that podcast, it's like, here's a story about a woman who died in Ireland, a French woman who died in Ireland, and 90% of the voices you hear.
Yeah.
It's basically, I've got a combine harvester.
Yeah. But there's people whose grandparents would have moved into, 2 meters down the road from where they ended up growing up themselves, and they'd still be referred to like as the English family.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if you came over in the original invasion, like if you came over in the Norman invasion by the 18th century, you're probably Irish.
Yeah.
If you came over in the Desmond invasion, are you Irish then 100 years later?
This is the thing, and it's almost impossible to put a label on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a series of letters survived from a French Huguenot officer, but he considers himself Irish. I mean, his family are based up near Belfast. His name's de la Charrois. And he's Irish but Huguenot, and he's got his own kind of personal identity going on there. He doesn't necessarily consider himself one or the other.
Yeah.
So it's a very weird sort of topic, and one that I try to avoid as much as possible because
Of course, yeah. There's no clean answers to it, and
No.
just move past it.
That's how I feel about Irish Americans when I'm in the States.
yeah.
It's
The
whatever you say.
Yeah, whatever you want to be.
the homeopathic Irish, one small drop, but people still think it matters.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're keeping like 25% native Irish, whatever that means.
Be they Protestant or Catholic. But
Yeah.
the thing is that could be a lot higher, because if you put yourself in the position of an Irish a officer based in Ireland. His job is to recruit a certain amount of men to keep his regiment full, and people desert, people die, people have been taken to serve elsewhere. So how you're surrounded by young men who are poor and probably looking for work. Why would you not recruit them? So what they started to do was they would take them to Scotland and sign them up as Scotsmen.
Yeah.
Or do the same in England, or just lie on the form.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure some guy stumbled across that after like his 6th voyage, the whole way to Scotland, land, get him sign a bit of paper, come back, like, should fucking cut out the middleman here.
Yeah, exactly. But interestingly, if a soldier were to desert and just bail out of the army, decided they've had enough for whatever reason, the newspapers would often publish a kind of a description saying, wanted, this guy, but it would often say listed in Scotland, born in Cork.
Right.
So the army clearly
So if
knew.
you hear someone being like, "Oh fucking, I'm from Glasgow, back."
Yeah, it's that kind of speaks with an Irish accent. It often features as well.
Yeah.
So the army clearly was aware and kept track of where these people were actually from in case they left, but they just lied on the official reports. So we actually don't know how many of the army were Irish in this period.
Yeah.
The official records say in around 20. I'd say it's probably pushing 30, maybe even more.
Yeah. It makes it. Yeah. It's also funny at this time. You always think it'd be easy to disappear, but if you're, like description was in the newspapers. Also, you think about like how gossipy small town Ireland is now.
Yeah.
If you go back to 1720, and all of a sudden some guy walks in with like, no money. He's clearly been walking for days in uniform.
Yeah.
Has an odd accent. You're like, well, this is suspicious.
Yeah.
Because you're always like, you just disappear and get a job in another town over, and no one would ever, like, who's going to give you a job?
Yeah. Especially when there's 5 guineas being offered.
For your
return.
head. Yeah. You probably just turn him in anyway and hope for the best.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned the kind of gossipy side of it. That French officer, de la Chavois, his letters back and forth from Belfast, the first 3 or 4 are just concerned with a local gossip woman whom he really doesn't like. And he's like, please tell my dad that everything she's saying about me is not true. I have a commission. I'm in the army. I'm making a name for myself. I'm not a waste of time.
A name is a little bitch.
Yeah. So desertion is a common theme throughout because, I mean, as discussed there, Irish service is boring as all hell. So you might as well leave. And when you enlist in the army, that's the moment you're at your wealthiest. So people started making a career of deserting and then re-enlisting and then deserting and then re-enlisting and just taking those bounties and sort of just...
Yeah.
There's a memoir of a chap called Peter Drake. And he doesn't stick to the one army. He does it in France. He does it in Spain. He's all over the place. He's great.
It always seems like they're doing these big recruitment. Like whenever they're trying to get recruits in, it's just a big session. You get everyone drunk. You get them to sign up. Why wouldn't you do that a couple of times a year?
Yeah, exactly.
The day out as much as anything else.
Yeah, and people joined the army for all sorts of reasons. It wasn't just I'm poor, I need money. Some did it to escape the law. Others for gambling debts. Is a really common one.
Now, to escape the law in the sense that they were on the run, or could you join the army and have previous convictions quashed?
Sometimes the latter. Usually they're on the run. And these are recorded in like private diaries, so it's not like they wouldn't say, by the way,
on the run.
by the way, I murdered someone, but I'm a really good shot, as evidenced by my
Yeah.
murder.
I was going to say it's pretty ballsy though. I'm on the run from the government. Where are you going to go? I'm going to go work for the government.
Yeah.
The civil service. That's where I am.
They'll never suspect me.
Yeah.
You can put me in jail. You can put me to work. Which is an aspect of the Ukrainian-Russian war I meant to follow up on. Didn't they do that like a few weeks ago? They released people from jail to go fight in the Eastern Front.
Yeah.
But, that's pretty cool.
And the French Foreign Legion have been doing that for
so that's what I was
centuries.
that's the whole thing of the French. They were like, if you joined, doesn't matter what your past is, you serve here and then you come out.
Yeah, which is why
Everything's
they
white
had
clean.
distinctly German numbers in the 1950s.
Yes.
Shall we say.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, recruiting done for many deserting is done for as many reasons as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes for love. And the newspapers would record as many details as they had with the women as well, because chances are they're going to stick together. And they are unflattering.
Oh, yeah.
It was a woman, Mary Welch, was described as inclined to fat.
Oh, Interesting, they called her inclined to fat because, ironically, inclines she didn't like them. Wasn't a fan.
Yeah, all good old Mary rolled down the incline well.
Yeah. Decline, she was all over that.
Yeah.
But, that's great. I thought you were going to say that if they ran out for love, they'd like put out the same APB, but it'd just be like bullets for love. So go easy on.
Yeah.
Don't
No,
try
it's
too
very much like,
Yeah.
find this woman.
Yeah.
And then women can be arrested for doing that kind of thing. Because obviously, in that kind of society,
It's the woman's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Blame laid with the deceiving harlot who
Yes, of
led the
course.
man astray.
Yeah.
You know, as is tradition.
Yeah. That's joining. I suppose if you joined up to the army to see the world and got stationed in Athlone, you
You'd be
probably
raging.
would. Yeah, you really would leave.
Yeah. And then there's one of the big things for officers in the army, one of the big sort of formative things that young gentlemen were supposed to do was a grand tour.
Yes.
You go around Europe, you see what life is like.
Yeah.
Spread your oats,
Mhm.
and you come back with lots of stories, and you're a man.
Yeah.
Difficult to do that when you're in Ireland. So you do see
Sure.
them taking like kind of mini versions of it. So they'll travel around, they'll meet other officers, and their attitudes towards Irish culture are revealing, to say the least.
Yeah.
One chap called Adolphus Uten, or
He
Ochton.
can fuck off.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably his problem with Irish culture is that he walked into a town, everyone's like, Adolphus.
Twat. He
I would think of the abuse that he would have got just from like the name alone.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he went by James for good reason.
That makes sense.
That'll help.
Yeah.
Small town Ireland's a cruel place. I saw on Twitter the other day some woman said that fair play to anyone trying to be stylish in Ireland. I once wore a red beret around like down in like he said Cork or some small town anyway. There's like people just started calling me Super Mario. That's exactly how.
I was wearing my red hat in Cork on Wednesday and some guy called me Jack Cousteau.
Did he even have a red hat?
Huh?
Did Jacques Cousteau have a red hat?
Yeah, he looked like I only found this out after. As soon as you Google him, that's his. He was the same. He inspired the guy from Life Aquatic.
Yeah,
also the big red hat. Steve Zissou. Yeah. So either or.
Yeah.
But it's still the same today. If a man called Adolphus walked into a town now, if you walked into Dundalk, people would be like, oh fuck it, where you escaped from SeaWorld?
Yeah.
A
Exactly.
dolphin.
Oh, a leather jacket. You're the Fonz.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah, that's the other thing. All the like slagging is really dated as well. It's all going back to the 80s.
Yeah, because that's the generation of people doing said.
Yeah,
slagging.
that was
Yeah,
it
like
was
the
it was
culture never
peak
developed
bullying.
from
It was when
Yeah.
bullying was at its high.
Yeah.
It's back
So-
when it was fun.
Adolphus and his mates are swanning around Ireland.
Yeah.
At one stage he ends up with a pet otter. He's very bizarre, but he lands himself. I think it was near Laois, or maybe he found this old Irish castle, and the locals were told, "Oh, you can't stay in the castle; it's haunted." So he's like, "My ass is it haunted?" So him and his friend spend the night in the bedroom and come out fine. He's like, "Clearly bollocks," and then on their merry way they go because they just view the whole thing as a little bit sad.
Yeah.
And he finds like there's coins with St. Patrick written on them, and he like gives a brief paragraph in his memoir about St. Patrick, and it's came to Ireland, clearly didn't do very much. This is really passive aggressive. And he was rocking around in the 1737, but once you hit 1740, there's a massive famine in Ireland. It's arguably kills more of the population than the 19th century one. It's vicious. There's a huge frost, which then is followed by an incredibly warm summer, which incinerates any surviving crops.
Right.
So we don't actually know how many people died in that famine because there weren't enough records, but it's substantial. And it's the only time where Adolphus is in any way sympathetic to the population. So he and his men find this horse that's recently died, and he gets his doctor in the regiment to check it to make sure it's edible, and then he portions it out to the population and gives them like the blood to make sausages and stuff. But in the very next paragraph he's escorting someone to be hung, so it's not it's not full sympathy, but he does think he kind of reflects on the fact that maybe the situation in Ireland is a bit unfair.
Yeah, Jesus. Even Adolphus got empathy.
Yeah, exactly. If Adolphus comes around to you, well then.
Yeah.
And he goes on to have an illustrious career commanding soldiers in European conflicts and everything, but his origin story in Ireland never talked about. Can't imagine why.
Yeah.
This is
I was there for a while. I was stuck in Laois. It was a bit bleak, and
Yeah.
then a famine happened.
yeah.
It's probably not much to write
Also
home,
extra nurse student, so
Oh well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Finished his studies, went into the army, and
Yeah.
kind of became this fancy man
Much like a lot of people, minus the army.
called Adolphus.
Called Adolphus. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll still meet some people in Trinity still call it Adolphus, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
I
yeah.
guarantee there's at least 6 Adolphuses in there now.
Probably.
Adelphi.
Adelphi.
So, I mean, the officers are quite a decent sort of life, I guess, doing these sorts of things. A lot of them didn't spend very long in Ireland. They were happy to be absentee, so the regiments kind of functioned without them. But there was supposed to be more officers in Ireland then in an equivalent. As a cost-saving measure, the Irish government decided to start using something they called the cadre system, or what is known now as the cadre system, where regiments would normally be 500 men.
Okay.
In Ireland, they keep them around 280, but they keep the same number of officers. So in theory, you had this core of hardcore, dedicated, uber-trained soldiers that you could very rapidly recruit around and then send off somewhere, in theory. In practice, you had diminished, ill-motivated, absentee kind of situation going on. So
This is... You love finding bits of history that just echo through the centuries. So what you're telling me is that the government tried to run an organization, and instead of having the required or advised members of rank and file, they were like, what if we just half the number of workers but keep the number of management inflated?
Exactly.
And then in theory, we'll have a really good workforce. If you've got more managers, then you'll manage better. And then the HSE will be, the army will be fine. That's beautiful.
That's exactly what it was.
Class.
And who will be these officers? Well, probably best to have the sons of the people who used to be officers.
They did a good job of it, did they? Doesn't matter. Get their sons in. Yeah.
Have they trained? No, it's in the DNA. Don't worry.
Listen, sure, they grew up around it. They know it.
Yeah. They were born into it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like Adolphus's dad, army officer.
And look how well he did.
Yeah, and he did so well.
Yeah.
So this system, usually would happen instead, because it's very difficult to recruit very rapidly if you're not allowed to recruit in Ireland.
Yeah.
So they usually just did this thing called drafting, where they would pick one regiment and say, okay, you're going to get fucked. So they'd take as many men as possible from that regiment, leaving them with a skeleton crew of maybe 60, and then the rest were officers.
Okay.
And the men would be taken to the regiment that's then shipped off elsewhere. So it was very inefficient.
Yeah.
And this policy of taking regiments out of Ireland leads to most of the issues that the army ends up coming into or fighting against in Ireland in this period. Because the 18th century is pretty peaceful in comparison.
Yeah.
It's not as sexy as like the 19th, where you got,
sure,
everything going on. And then the 17th, ooh, that's it.
But the end of the 18th century is all of the American Revolution, the French Revolution.
But even in Ireland, very little happens.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's that period is just kind of like you get the shit kicked out of you at the end of the 17th century, and even the Irish have to
we'll take a breath,
take a little bit of a break. And I guess you throw a famine in the middle of that.
Yeah.
What would that's probably a difficult question to answer, but what would the population have been like? 'Cause even if you're conscripting all these young men into the army,
I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah.
You're probably around this, less than would be today. I think maybe 3-4 mil. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But you had 12,000 men anyway.
Yeah.
In theory,
Mm-hmm.
in practice, probably more around 8,500, which isn't enough to do the jobs they're being told to do.
Mm.
So you end up with fewer men, and whenever there's a big decline in numbers, you end up with a spike in unrest. And that is both in the countryside and also in the cities, and they're very different flavors of unrest.
Yeah.
So in the cities, particularly in Dublin, you've got factional violence like gang warfare. 18th century Dublin is a horrible place. The two big ones were the Ormond Boys and the Liberty Boys.
Yes.
And they were the lads.
Yes.
So
we will be doing an episode on them eventually.
Oh, my supervisor quite literally wrote the book on that.
Oh,
so I can lend you the book.
I'm sure your supervisor will enjoy that. That's probably it sounds very interesting. Probably not a big seller, and like the two people who would buy it, you're like, I'll give it for free.
Yeah. Shout out to Jimmy Kelly.
Yeah.
So the Ormond and Liberty Boy, North Side, South Side, a classic rivalry.
Yeah.
Protestant Catholic, Ormond Boys.
Like in the North Side and the South Side have been fighting each other so much that they put the Liffey there to keep them apart.
Exactly.
I'm sure that's the opener to Jim Kelly's book.
So you have the Ormond Key and Liberties are the two big areas, and it was primarily butchers against weavers. Ormond Boys being the butchers, Liberties being where most of the weaving was. And they battered each other throughout the century. There's noticeable peaks and valleys but when
Yeah.
it was violent, it was really bad.
Yeah.
And the army is regularly called out to deal with these kind of riots.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind, the army doesn't have riot training, and these are soldiers who are trained to kill, pretty bored,
Yeah.
and a bit of a live fire exercise.
Yeah.
It gets bloody quite often.
Mm.
And you do see the army kind of forming an alliance with the Liberty Boys.
Because Southside looks after their own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But,
But even like around the Liberties, the Black Pits, this is one of the most impoverished areas.
Mm.
I mean, this is the real hot take that's been going back 400 years. It's never been north side, south side. It's east west, and it's about time we fucking started talking about it. Like, the east coast is where there's loads of places on the north side. Malahide, like Clontarf, very fancy.
yeah,
Portmarnock,
sword isn't bad.
Swords isn't even
Yeah.
bad. But then on the west side and the north side, you got the famous better one. But then the west side
Yeah,
and
but
the south
basically
side,
you're
you
just
got.
saying like the things closer to the ocean, which
Yeah,
is always
but
the
that's
way. Yeah.
that's where the real money is.
It's
You
the
go.
dart.
It's the 19th century dart.
Yeah, exactly.
You come to the west side of the south side, you got Inchcore, Crumlin, Ballyfermot, Tala.
Yeah.
All the best places to live.
Yeah.
That's what's really good. Like the Liberties wasn't a very fancy area.
No.
But it's good to see that the army was picking sides as well.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it was proximity to barracks as well, because the
Sure.
Orban boys annoyed the army, and they were right next to the main sort of barracks in Dublin.
Right.
And I think the Newgate jail was somewhere around there as well. It might have been on the south side equivalent. I can't remember.
Yeah.
My map of Dublin is bad.
Yeah.
And it should be better. But you have these gangs clashing, and then the army form an alliance with the Liberty Boys. But then, because the army is massively depleted coming into the 1740s, 50s, because of a conflict called the War of the Austrian Succession, which takes place in Europe, where Austrian ruler comes to Maria Theresa takes the throne of Austria, and Europe goes, "Ha! Look, a woman," and immediately attacks her. Class,
Yeah.
just top tier patriarchal
Yeah.
nonsense.
Meanwhile, like England would have had female queens.
They would have previously.
Previously, yeah.
Yeah. They're steeping George's at that stage.
Yeah.
Second or third. So England gets involved, so lots of soldiers are lifted from Ireland, and then Bonnie Prince Charlie kicks up in Scotland. So you have
Yes.
the Jacobite uprising there. So, oh my God, we need more soldiers from Ireland. So you have very few soldiers in the garrison.
Mm-hmm.
So the Ormond and Liberty Boys kick off, because Dublin's pretty undefended.
Yep.
The army sides with the Liberty Boys.
England's distraction is the Ormond boys' opportunity.
Yeah.
Because I love the fact that they could have called themselves the Ormond and Liberty Men.
No.
Yeah.
Although there'll be more boys in a few minutes, don't you worry.
Well, we did like a whole thing about the origins of the Orange Order, and it's all so that's again like what 1780s they were coming around.
Yeah.
It's all like the Liberty Street Boys or the Diamond Hill Boys.
Yeah, it's all boys.
No, it's all boys.
You think
yeah.
someone would have one up them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they do the. Oh no, the White Boys. It is still boys. They do
Yeah.
eventually.
You've got the
someone-
White Boys, the Oak Boys, and the Steel Boys, and then the Right Boys.
the Right Boys.
Yeah, all kinds of boys in the countryside.
And then the White is Right Boys, but we don't.
we don't talk about
them
them.
anymore.
Yeah, or the Pride Boys.
No, I
Pride
think-
Boys.
Yeah.
They're not big up gay rights. It's a very different kind of.
Yeah. That's the Right Boys.
Yes. Yeah. So, sir.
And their
Right.
good faction, their best friends, the Ride or Die Boys.
Yeah, very different boys again.
Again, yes.
Yeah.
That was the female group, the Ride or Die bitches.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't hear as much about them. I think
No.
they're criminally underrepresented.
Yeah.
In the history. But the Liberty Boys and the army formed this alliance because there's so few soldiers, and then the army finds some of their own soldiers participating in the rioting. Because really, you've taken the best soldiers to go fight in the war. You're kind of left with the dregs.
Yeah, sure.
And they're going to be getting involved. So the army kind of devolves into just another gang in Dublin, and they form an alliance with. Start rioting. Some soldiers get caught. So the army does something about this. They take all the soldiers in the Dublin garrison, line them up in Oxman Town Green, and tell them, if I see any of you participating or suppressing riots, we're docking your pay.
Okay.
Ordering no participation whatsoever, no involvement.
Okay.
And then they immediately order the army to go into the Liberties and dismantle a load of illegal cloth markets.
Okay.
So the Liberty Boys get very pissed off. They then ally with the Ormond boys, and Dublin essentially burns for the summer of 1750 because the army thought, well, we're not going to deal with it. We've been told not to.
But the Liberty and the Ormond boys come together.
Yes.
Amazing.
They form an alliance against the military.
Yes.
And they tear apart Dublin, and it culminates in this massive riot which ends on Oxman Town Green, which is like the military sort of parade area, which is really embarrassing, and they arrest 2 people.
So Oxman Town is what, Smithfield?
Yeah.
Okay. And then
Do you just know that because of the coffee shop?
Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
It works. So that area was a prime riot location.
Yeah. Still is.
Yeah, and there's loads of minor skirmishes where soldiers like they play in like dice games with the butchers in the area, and then a fight breaks out because the soldiers cheat, and then the soldiers go back and get guns and very quickly win.
Yeah.
So the military as a riot police is a disaster because soldiers in that kind of capacity are terrifying anyway.
Yeah.
But particularly they have no legal support. So if a soldier kills a civilian, it's up to the coroner to determine who's guilty, the mob or the guy who fired the bullet. And some of the cases are really stupid. There's a guy called Thomas Topping who has his head blown off by a soldier in Cork, musket ball to the eye and gone.
Yeah.
And the coroner, well, it was probably the mob's fault.
Yeah.
Probably. I know a musket ball went into his skull, but it was probably the mob's fault.
He was probably asking for it.
Yeah, and
What was Thomas Topping wearing,
he was in his shop. A
What
musket
sort of
ball
a
went through the window.
I was going to say, is it like the history is written by the victor? So if someone from the army dies, do they just go, it was probably his fault as well then?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's as much you don't have to prosecute then.
Yeah.
If you just blame the victim, you can
Yeah.
move on.
See, sometimes blaming the victim.
Yeah, there you go. Victim blaming, or is that like to call it justice?
I didn't think this would be the podcast that would get me cancelled, but here we are.
Definitely.
Yeah, we have to like that. So what was the dice story?
Yeah, so there's the soldiers and the butchers they gather for gambling on a Sunday, which is no. And
Why not do it at the foot of our Lord while they're at it? He's on the crucifix.
and the butchers cheat, or so the soldiers think. So the soldiers refuse to pay, and the butchers draw their knives, and the soldiers take out their bayonets and go back to them, get some guns, and then they end up driving them through. But as a result of this,
But I imagine the butcher's cheating is just like rolling 3 dice and being like 6 + 6 + 6 is 18. It's like black magic.
yeah,
That's a good way to settle it, though. Very Hemingway-esque.
yeah,
Like if you want to find out who the best writer is, let's go out and fight about it.
yeah. Well, let's swing digs and see what happens. Throw hands. And the butchers and the soldiers had this horrific relationship throughout, mostly from the Ormond boys. But then at the end of the century, and this is across Ireland, not just in Dublin, you have a phenomenon coming about called the hawking movement. Now, hawking refers to the hawk of the leg, and originally this was people would go around and mutilate cattle or farmyard animals. They would slash their legs so they couldn't
How
walk.
much whiskey had these cows been drinking?
Well, there was a lot of ulcers on the legs, so it's very easy to tell.
Yeah.
But in the 1770s and 1780s, they start doing this to soldiers.
Ooh.
And it's very difficult to know why. So some people think it's a reaction to what's going on in America. American War of Independence is going on, and they think, oh, maybe this is just a kind of an extension of anti-government feeling as a result, in sympathy with what's going on there.
Yeah.
But if the soldiers, they're kind of on patrol at night, they get asked, directions, they stop, and then someone comes out from the alleyway, knocks them down, and slits their leg. And
Which, I mean, if that happened to you now, is not ideal. That happens to you in 1780. You're not recovering from that, I imagine.
no, you're not. You'll never walk again. And
Yeah.
this is the thing: it's a targeted attack on the profession of
Yeah.
soldiering, because you can't march. If you wanted to just deal with the soldier, you just draw the knife across his neck.
Yeah.
You wanted to kill them, but this is very sinisterly done.
Yeah.
It's a deliberate targeting.
So is that why in Dublin then if people stop to ask you in the street, you just run away? You don't ask.
it stems
Yeah.
directly back.
Well, I had it the other day. I was walking down to my place down near Christchurch, and I had like my headphones on, and there was a very big aggressive man who was like, and he was like trying to stop people, and everyone was like, "No, I'm sorry, you're so scary, I don't want to." And I was like walking by him, he's trying to stop me, and I kind of jumped out of the way, and like I didn't run away, but I was like, "Sorry, I can't," and he was like, "What is wrong with people? What is?" I was like, "You're you, man."
He's the worst charity chucker you've ever seen.
Yeah. I just want to find out where the Nazi rally is. I was in Cork on Wednesday again, and like I just got off the bus, and some attractive woman stopped me and was like, "Sorry, are you from Cork?" I was like, "No," and just sort of walked on. And caught myself 2 seconds there. I was like, "Yeah, Dublin has changed me." Yeah.
It broke you.
And someone asked me a simple, straightforward question. I was like, "Fuck off! What do you want?"
Yeah, they could have a knife.
They could have slashed the back of my legs.
Exactly, they could have.
I didn't even know about this until 2 minutes ago, but it's what I've always feared.
Yeah,
I always knew it somehow.
This military jacket is purely decoration.
Yeah. The home rule badge. I don't even understand what it means.
Yeah. Interestingly, then this phenomenon becomes like the default reaction to soldiers' bad behavior. So in the 1780s, the soldiers start really just kicking off, and they do a lot of bad stuff. And the hawking comes back as it becomes into trend. It's like that becomes the way to protest the military. And you do see soldiers hawking themselves because bounties and pensions begin to be offered. So if pensionable life, so they just and then throw the knife away, but some of them get caught. So then
because I'd imagine if you just cut the back of your legs, you can't throw the knife very far.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
on the ground crying. There's a bloody knife beside you. Like, fuck.
The trick is do it next to the liffey, then you'll never get it.
Yeah.
But so you have all of this sort of media backlash at this. So the newspapers, which are pretty anti-army anyway, are like, "Oh my, look at the military, look at the absolute state of them. They can't stop these riots that are happening. They're rioting themselves. They're mutilating themselves. It's falling apart."
That does sound like a very like modern, like army men are getting their legs slashed off, and the media's just like, they're probably doing it to themselves. It's a black flag operation.
Yeah.
Or is this really happening?
Yeah. And some of it was genuine. A lot of it was false.
Yeah.
So the soldiers start taking things into their own hands. So there's an example from Cork where the soldier gets hawked and he's brought back to the barracks, and his mates are like, "Okay, what did he look like?" Here's a vague description. They go out and grab someone who looks vaguely similar.
Yeah.
And he brings them back to the barracks. And the guy who's been hawked said, "This wasn't the man who did this to me." Doesn't matter. They throw him in the river.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he survives, but it becomes extremely partisan.
Yeah.
And it really is just gang activity, but in uniform.
I mean, yeah, there's definitely different times in history where like the army is like one step away from a gang.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, especially in this day and age, because the demographics are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
They all, most soldiers were labourers of some kind before they joined the army. A lot of them were clothiers or like farm hands, this sorts of thing. And you're dropped into an unfamiliar city.
Yeah.
You are also dealing with young men of a similar age. It's all very sort of masculine, performative sort of side of things. It's something that I think more work needs to be done on. Read my thesis for
Andrew Dorman's "Did Bro Culture Ruin 18th Century Barracks?"
Yeah, and I mean the stuff they get up to, it's this military sort of exceptionalism, really. So the army, soldier gets jailed for sexual assault or assault normally, or murder.
Yeah.
And the army will break him out of prison. And it's quite difficult as a prison guard to resist an attack by 25 armed men.
That's it, yeah.
And you have this kind of whole culture developing of the military being above the law in some cases, which is very difficult to police. Because in an ideal world, the army would deal with their own sort of thing. They had courts martials, they could do everything internally. But if you murder a civilian, then you're more likely to be dealt with in a civilian court. And chances are you're going to be executed. So let's look after our own. Let's break him out of prison.
Yeah. Is there even a standing police force at the time?
No. The first instance of a standing police force in the British Isles is in Dublin in 1786.
Okay.
For most of the period, it's the military. There's there's constables, but they are amateurs on 1-year tenure.
Yeah.
And they can't stop a riot.
Or stop it, an army officer coming in and breaking someone out of prison.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got the other options. I mean, you've got the militia, but they're not really, that's more of a Protestant bros club.
Yeah.
And then late in the century, you have the volunteers, and they start doing a lot of the police work for the army. And then they come at loggerheads because the volunteers are seen to be superseding the army, and the army gets very insecure about everything. And there's a riot takes place. There's a barman called Flannery on the quays, and some officers come into his bar and start taking the piss out of his wife. They tweak the nose of Flannery as well. Damn. So Flannery takes out his musket under the counter,
classic,
because he's a member of the volunteers, and like shoos the officers out onto the quays. So the fight goes out onto the quay. At some stage, the musket ends up in the Liffey, But people have started seeing what's happening, and they start rallying around the volunteer because he's one of us.
Yeah.
And they start throwing stones at the officers. So the officers retreat back to the barracks, and then they try and turn out the entire garrison to deal with this bar fight.
Yeah.
They're eventually told go home by the commanding officer. But this kind of gang, it's really unprofessional, essentially. It speaks a lot about just the violence that was 18th century Dublin.
Sure. And it's also good to see that the tradition of throwing murder weapons into the Liffey, it goes back that far.
Exactly. Or just throwing things in the Liffey generally.
Yeah, just for the fun of it.
Yeah, like the Dublin at that stage, the amount of coach drivers, so I guess taxi drivers, who are reported having died from whiskey overdoses is genuinely concerning.
Yeah.
Like, he bet that he could drink 4 quarts of whiskey in an hour. It's like shocking. He died. Wow. Like, and Trinity.
He died of drinking 4 quarts. I bet I could do that. And so a wave took over.
Yeah. Or
It's like our equivalent of like the man versus food like challenges.
Yeah.
Like, if you do this, we'll put your photo up on the wall.
Or
4 quarts of whiskey.
remember, like 10 years ago, there was what was this? You just drank a pint challenge.
Yeah.
What was the one that it stopped when like 2 people died?
Yeah, it's like guy from my village died.
Yes.
Yeah. That was
Jesus.
the neck challenge.
Yeah,
Is that what it
neck
was?
challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've always been stupid.
Neck nominations.
Yeah, neck
Yeah, that
nominations.
was
Yeah.
it. Yeah, and everyone was
The
like,
yeah.
"This will end horribly," and it's like, but it has to end horribly before people will stop it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like everything that was banned in schools.
Yes. Apart from Pokemon cards.
Of course.
But so with the Irish Volunteers, I'm trying to remember about that period. Were they brought in to keep the peace while the garrisons were sent over to deal with the American Revolution?
So they were founded on the back of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Because there was a genuine fear of French invasion, which stemmed back to the French landing in Carrickfergus in 1760.
Yes.
So they come about as a result of that, and then they start becoming more and more popular. And as more of the garrison is deployed to America, I think 16 regiments come out of Ireland. Ireland's basically empty of the mill. They need something, so the volunteers kind of fill that role, and then they become more political, and it starts Grattan and that kind of thing.
It
kicks
feeds
off.
into 1798.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. It all kind of you can trace that sort of lineage back,
Yeah.
but there's 140 companies of volunteers at one stage in Ireland. It's a really substantial force,
Yeah.
and the military feel quite threatened by it, existentially as opposed to physically.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they're supposed to cooperate, but
Yeah.
they're kind of being undermined by these lads in uniform.
Yeah.
Again, that all kind of boils back down to the one time the French actually invade.
Yeah. So will we talk about that?
Yeah, we
piece
can
of-
talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted to only one or two other questions about, because this is what I was saying to you earlier on about I keep intermittently reading about Dublin being a shithole or class, but I thought during the Protestant ascendancy that it was pretty good. I've heard, read it described as you read at one point it's like it's the Paris of Europe, the second city of Europe.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later it was like it was infested with slums and the biggest shithole that there was.
Yeah, there's like no-go zones.
Yeah.
It's like if you go, you will get mugged.
There still are.
Yeah.
What did they call it? Areas de risco.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see that over lockdown? Like the delivery drivers released a map of Dublin with different sections marked off as areas de risco.
Everything to the west.
Well, genuinely, everything down this part of Inchicore, grand. You walk 2 minutes down the road, area de risco. So yeah, well, when does the Georgian period start? 17.
1710s.
Oh, that early.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. So then at that stage you start getting all like the Dublin as it kind of looks now, those old buildings.
Yeah.
That's when they start to get built up as a proper
Dublin,
city.
there are parts of it that's really, really nice. Like it's a capital city. I mean, Dublin has the first ever purpose-built Parliament building in Europe.
Oh yeah.
The central bank now.
Yeah.
I mean, Trinity College is obviously an institution
Yeah.
at that stage, and it's renowned. And then all these sort of other nice bits, the castle, that kind of stuff. So there's parts of the city that are lovely, but there's also parts of it that are horrific.
Yeah.
I mean, for some reason this anecdote sticks in my mind. Can't imagine why, but a Trinity student is like using like a punt on the river, and a taxi driver throws a lump of shale at him and just kills him.
Yeah.
Which is, first of all, great shot.
Yeah.
But it's just this violence, so many brothels.
Yeah.
And
then in the
Oh yes,
negative
there are nice
column-
parts too.
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know why I'm struggling to wrap my head around this. Like, you hear different reports about Dublin being class or Dublin being a shithole. It's the same now.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's always been.
I'd like to think there are fewer brothels now.
Well,
You just need to know where to look.
yeah,
That's-
so that was probably.
yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised in the next 6 months if there was a story of someone throwing a firecracker at a Trinity student, taking a kayak down the canal and killing them.
You ever heard about like the Shamrock Rovers fans 2 days ago throwing flares onto a pitch at an injured Bohemians player?
Yeah.
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 Some parts of Dublin
Well,
aren't so nice.
No, while D8 is being called like the nicest place to live in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it is Dublin.
City
A
of
mixed
character.
bag.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean that's reflected. It's not just Dublin centric. It's the same no matter where you go. And where the military is more heavily concentrated, you get more stories of military unrest. Obviously,
Sure, yeah.
well, when you look at somewhere like the countryside, and these like very more isolated sort of garrisons, it's kind of a different story because they're more afraid of kind of white boy activity, say these agrarian protesters en masse,
Yeah.
and they're kind of being more deployed in a more military appropriate way, I guess, if you want to call it that. Like not pitched battles, but they know what they're doing. They're trained to deal with this sort of thing compared to rioters on the streets.
Yeah.
You know, there's no doctrine to deal with them, whereas with mass
Sure.
protest, you kind of feel like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. They haven't really cracked urban warfare yet.
Yeah, there's one case
I
in
can't get
Cork.
my head around what's the uniform of the white boys? Is it like
White.
backwards snapbacks, sleeveless vest, kind of white claw in their hand?
No, it's fucking brown khakis with lots of pockets for all your bits.
Yeah.
A big keychain
Yeah,
with keys to several properties. White collar tucked in,
yes,
and then backward snapcat.
and the leader wears double denim.
Yeah, and tribal tattoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in so that in Cork City, there's one case where the soldiers attempt to a kind of de-escalation process, and it reads very similar to what happened in Boston during the Boston massacre. So they arrive with their guns and they tell the crowd, "We're armed," and that there's a woman in the crowd, and the newspaper specifies this woman who's organizing the mob, and she's passing out stones, and she tells them, "No, they're not armed. They don't have any powder," so they fire above their heads. And
That
it's
was
like,
their one bullet. They don't have any more.
they don't have any more bullets, exactly. And so they keep throwing stones, and then they fire at like the shop signs. They're kind of above
Yeah.
their heads, and then she's like, "Oh, they're definitely out now," and then they fire into the crowd and kill
Yeah.
like 12.
Yeah.
You know, it's so you do see at least an attempt at de-escalation
But now
there,
they're
Yeah.
definitely out of
They can't kill us all.
as they very much do spend the rest of the day killing them all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think she's charged because, of course, a woman being
It's her
involved.
fault,
Yeah, it's her fault,
Yeah.
naturally. So
Well, it's not her fault. She can't count.
no, or she doesn't know the intricacies of how
Now
many.
you're asking yourself, did I fire one bullet or two? The real question is, you feeling lucky? Cork.
So in urban areas, it's a mess. In
Yeah.
the countryside, you've got the boys,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
kinds of boys,
The
so
boys.
many boys.
Yeah. The boys running riot.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I have a favorite. I like the Right Boys. I
Yeah.
think if I had to pick one, they were kind of less violent. They employed mass protests, so they would recruit people outside of churches. You know, come along,
Yeah.
and then you get thousands of people roaming around the countryside, just kind of being annoying.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the other, like the Steel Boys, were very violent.
Mm.
I think they end up taking over the city centre of Belfast at one stage. Like 2,500 guys with guns. It's pretty significant.
That's not as fun as the right boys.
No.
Mm.
And then the White Boys, the originals, in their white shirts, no
Mm.
snapbacks, sadly.
Yeah. They just knocked over fences.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, they did some pretty violent stuff, with cutting off ears, burying people up to the neck, that kind of thing.
Hey, you know.
That's a weird activity to do if your dress code is entirely white.
Yeah, you'd think they would have been more practical.
Yeah, their mothers must have been sick of washing their uniform.
That's a
Why
real-
couldn't you be in with the right boys? They're nice to their mothers.
the correct boys.
The correct boys.
Yes.
The brought up right boys.
Yeah, the proper boys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, basically, it all comes down to
The
Ireland's-
ribbon men. That's who I was trying to
The
think
ribbon
of.
men are very violent.
They are, but that's the first instance. That's the 1900s. That's the
Yeah.
first instance of men.
Yeah.
Yes,
coming
but they
in.
also,
Not the 1900s.
but
the
then they
1800s.
pick the ribbon as the
Yeah,
style.
yeah,
We'll
yeah.
show them.
We'll
be the
show
men.
them.
Yeah. The dandy men.
We're the frilly boys. No, the frilly men.
Somehow that's worse.
Yes.
Frilly Boys has a boyish charm to it.
Yeah.
Frilly Men is.
Yeah. Part of the Ribbon Men, the Napper Tandy division. The SAS of its time. The elite SEAL Team 6 part.
We can push over a fence in seconds.
Yeah. You should see what they do to a corral.
The basic 18th century Ireland is a complete mess.
Yeah.
And the army helps. Kinda. But in cities, it devolves into being another gang, but better armed.
Yeah.
So if we go back to those three objectives, first one being a reserve for empire. Okay, fair enough. Now they're kept in barracks. The barracks are of questionable quality because it's up to a civilian called a barrack master to repair it.
Okay.
And the barrack masters did not often take their job seriously. So this is a description of a barracks in Cork. I think 1760. The barracks at Cork for the two regiments suffers horrifically from natural decay, length of time and original defects, and are all in the most ruinous condition, and have been cast these many years as unfit for the accommodation of His Majesty's troops, though a garrison of so much importance to the King. Most of the floors and joists are rotted and decayed so as to make it dangerous for the troops to lie down. The hearths all broken falling down, many of them propped to prevent them from falling. The staircases and doors are very bad. The window cases and sash frames are so decayed and rotten to be insufficient to hold the glass, the squares of which are daily falling out. The chimneys also bad, except those which have been rebuilt after having blown down, and the timber and roof so defective in many places the rain comes through. In whole, it is very bad and basically inhabitable.
Still $2,000 a month for a
Yes.
single room.
It's like, what's that go for on Daft?
It's a fixer-upper.
Yeah.
A handyman's
You only have to
dream.
share it with 8 people.
Yeah. So preventing civilian unrest, the military kind of bottles it. Barracks for empire, they do it, but it's not great. And the last one's prevention for foreign invasion.
Yeah.
And they only ever come into a foreign invasion once in 1760. And this attack is kind of a misguided venture, if you want to call it that.
Okay.
So Francois Thureau, which is a great name.
Amazing
name.
Yeah.
Real French name.
Yes.
He's a
He
hero.
couldn't get more French. His
Yeah.
name was Jacques Thureau.
Francois.
I want
Yeah.
change it to France.
Yeah, Franz Thoreau. So he is kind of a respected commodore of the French military, and he's given a special mission to distract everybody as much as possible in anticipation of a planned invasion of Essex.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure why one would want to invade Essex.
It's the only way.
Low-hanging fruit.
Someone was going to get there. I just got it out of the way so we could move on.
I respect the
By
dedication.
someone, you meant me.
I can see you eyeing it up. I was like, I'll save him. I'll take this bullet for the team.
So Thoreau, knowing this is a vital mission, he's given 1,000 men, good quality soldiers. Like he's given some Swiss guards who are some of the best France has, some cavalry with no horses. The theory being you'll pick some up on the way.
Yeah.
And he's sent off on this mission to basically mess around in the Irish Sea. So
Okay.
he does a little bit of raiding here, does a little bit of raiding there. But by a few months in, his men are tired. He's lost about 400 of them to disease and illness and hunger.
Yeah.
And as he's facing a mutiny led by his infantry officer, a chap called Flaubert. So Thoreau had friends in Ireland, so he thought, I'll invade Ireland. Why not?
Yeah.
Great decision.
I mean, we're having great difficulty just fucking
Yeah.
about invading. I mean, the men are hungry and dying of disease. I'll just start a war.
Yeah, exactly. Should
Much
point out,
easier.
the Essex invasion has been cancelled at this stage.
Oh.
No one's told him.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably hard to get news when you're on the boat.
True. You think, I know, bird.
Yeah.
Something, I don't know. It seems doable. Regardless, he's told this.
Essex birds are famously unreliable, though.
Nice.
I've
Again,
never seen the show. I
it's women in tan. That's as much as...
yeah.
Yeah, it's my knowledge of it. And again, to distract from the non-existent invasion, he lands at Kilroot, just outside of Carrickfergus. Now, Carrickfergus is supposed to be a strong point of the Irish garrison. The castle has many holes in the walls. It is garrisoned by 200 men who have 4 bullets each. So this isn't exactly presenting a phenomenal threat.
Yeah.
So these men...
Do they have 4 bullets, or is there just one lady saying they could not have more than 4 bullets?
She's walking behind the French. They're fine. They're fine.
Yeah.
They're going to run out soon.
So Carrickfergus is Fermanagh?
It's near Belfast. I'm not sure which county it's in.
I think
Oh.
it says Antrim when I looked it up earlier.
That sounds right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's, a place you can approach by sea.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So he lands near it, disembarks his men, and the local garrison, who's under command of a chap called Jennings, is told that the French are here, and he's surely not, surely not. So his men are.
This is the third objective. We couldn't. No.
His men are very poorly trained as well. They're all new recruits.
Oh, so Carrickfergus. It's where William lands.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were Schoenberg lands the first time. So
Yeah.
they've already gone through this
They
invasion.
should have seen this coming,
Yeah, it was only, it was 100 years ago, but in those times, that's like yesterday.
and they should have fixed the castle by then.
Yeah, sure.
Wonder
We're
what
still getting over the last siege.
what parallels we have with that compared to our current army.
Yeah.
An invasion. But the fitness test wasn't for another month.
What do you mean? So
Hardly.
yeah, he's got maybe 25 men who know what they're doing, a lot of new recruits, and
Yeah.
a couple of people who are there to recruit. So it's a pretty insignificant force. But he does give it a go. So
Yeah.
him and his men line the walls of Carrickfergus. And one of the guys who's there on recruiting isn't part of the regiment. He's part of a different regiment. He's a chap called Corporal Cunningham. And Corporal Cunningham doesn't give a fuck. So I don't know where he gets these extra musket balls, because everyone's supposed to have 4. But he leaps over the wall on a kind of a solo mission.
It sounds like he's got a couple of extra musket balls.
Yeah. And he shoots down 8 Frenchmen, including putting a bullet into the leg of the infantry commander Flaubert, who was going to lead the mutiny.
Ah.
So, despite Cunningham's best efforts, this is folly. So they fall back into the town, and the French come into the town, and they end up with having a firefight in the streets. And one of the accounts records a French soldier who deserves praise for. There's a little girl wanders between the firing lines, and the French soldier runs out between the fire and picks up the little girl and brings her out of the thing. And apparently he gets a round of applause, and then they start shooting at each other again.
That's nice.
Because, that's the way these things work.
Yeah.
So he got, big round of applause, and they fall back to the castle. And at this stage, they're out of ammunition, so they're throwing roof tiles and shale and rocks, and kind of trying to fight with bayonets and stuff.
There's
But-
one Dublin man who's like, I can fucking do this.
They called the taxi driver.
yeah, I've got previous.
But despite the efforts of that Dublin man, these incidents were not connected. I should clarify.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time. So they eventually surrender,
Yeah.
and the garrison surrenders, and the town is sacked because they can't give any provisions to the French. So Thoreau says, "Okay, well, if you can't give me provisions, we're ransacking the town, and I'm going to send a runner to Belfast nearby and demand provisions from Belfast." Belfast at this stage is absolutely bricking it. Pretty much every man who can hold a gun has been drafted into a local militia. They're putting up barricades.
Yeah.
They are very scared. So to pay off the French, they give them 40 hogsheads of wine. Not sure how much a hogshead is, but it's a great unit of measurement.
It is, yeah.
20 hogsheads of brandy, 30 barrels of peas, 3 bags of onions and garlic, 60 beefs,
Yeah.
60 barrels of butter,
60 beefs, just 60 arguments.
4 barrels of vinegar, 4,000 weight of biscuit, 1,000 weight of tobacco, 600 weight of candles, 400 weight of rice, and 100 weight of sugar.
Okay.
So
That's a hell of a recipe.
yeah, I'm not sure what one could make with that.
No.
The biggest stir fry man has ever seen.
Yeah.
So they pay them off, and Thoreau, having heard that the rest of the Irish garrison is mobilizing, decides maybe I should bug out. I've been an incredible distraction. But,
Yes.
I've lost 60 or so men attacking this town, and I can't face the rest of the Irish army.
No.
So he leaves, and his expedition is eventually sunk and annihilated off the Isle of Man at the Battle of Bishop's Court. But up until 1798, that is the only time French soldiers successfully land on Irish soil.
Okay.
So does that mean technically they did their job?
I mean, yeah. He distracted from the Essex invasion so hard that they forgot to do the invasion. But so they were scuttled off of the Isle of Man, so he didn't even get away with all the candles.
No, he didn't get any of the candles, but he himself was killed. The Royal Navy obliterated squadron at the
Shit.
Battle of Bishop's Court.
Yeah.
So it's a tragic loss for France.
Yes.
I mean, losing their talisman Thoreau
Yeah.
and all that brandy.
All the beef.
Yeah. But that's the only time the Irish garrison's ever tested in battle in Ireland. And they do a decent job. and fight till they are out of ammunition. And
Yeah.
put up a good fight. Surrendering, not so
On
good.
pretty good terms.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it does highlight some of the insufficiencies of the army.
Yeah.
So the force that's sent up to relieve them is 7 regiments strong. So that's maybe 3,000 men or so.
Mm.
And they're given loads of artillery, the good stuff, the new stuff. It's
Yeah.
fresh out of Dublin. No one knows how to use it.
Yeah.
And this is only revealed afterwards that the gunners who were escorting it don't really know what they're doing. So whether or not the army could have
Guys
actually...
looking down the barrels of guns like telescopes. I can't see anything.
Your electronic voting machines. It's, do you know what? Put those guns there in the warehouse.
Yeah, maybe you will work on those later.
Mm.
And it kind of begs the question, could the army have ever stopped an actual invasion? Like, this is 600 dudes who are hungry
Yeah.
and kind of looking for food.
And they already take over Carrickfergus.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
capture what's supposed to be one of the strong points. So,
They must have been really annoyed about those 30 beefs. Wait, what rations did we have?
yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. If 60 beefs was 60 cows,
Yeah.
no wonder they couldn't fight a sea battle. There's too many cows on their ships. Like, that's a
Sure, yeah. Yeah. You're really weighing yourself down.
Yeah, can't
Um,
maneuver with that much cattle.
so that's the only time they're really put under test.
Yeah, in battle.
Yeah.
Unless you count the various clashes with civilians. But I don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. And in the 1760s, yeah, would they have been there's no real European, like they wouldn't have had half the garrison fighting in Flanders.
So the 1760s, you're kind of in the middle of the 7 Years' War.
Mm.
So that ran from
The 3.5 year war, as it was known at the time, optimistically.
yeah. It's like calling the First World War is a exercise in
Yeah.
pessimism.
Yeah.
So the garrison, not garrison, the war started in 1756 or 55, depending on who you believe,
Mm.
and ends in 1763. It's mostly fought in America. There's most of the European fighting is done in Prussia, and that's got France and Austria and Russia trying to put Frederick the Great in his place and failing miserably in the
Yeah.
process. And there's also fighting in India with another Irishman on both sides. You got, I think, Robert Clive, who's scum, and and then a chap called Delali Tollendal, who's fighting for the French, but he's ex-Irish Brigade,
Okay.
and he's sent over and he's scapegoated and eventually guillotined for having lost India to the English.
Ah.
But most of the war I guess that's relevant to the British Army, is being fought in America,
Yeah.
known as the French-Indian War, because those are the people they were shooting at.
Okay.
Confusingly not related to the Indian War that was going on elsewhere.
No, with the French.
No, because we didn't have appropriate names for the Native American
Of course.
population
Yeah.
at that time. So it's a massive sideshow. And in the grand scheme of things, 600 men it's a footnote.
Yeah.
It's pretty insignificant, but it's a test. And I would argue it's a test that's failed.
Yeah.
Okay, you've stopped the 600 men from taking Belfast. That should
Mhm.
never have been on the table.
No. Yeah.
It doesn't scream successful defense on them.
No. But even to get, so were they raiding along the coast of Ireland? Or where were they raiding?
Yeah, I think they prioritized Scotland in the first instance because
Okay.
again, the invasion's supposed to be on the other
Yeah,
coast,
yeah.
so we'll draw some of them away.
Mhm.
And as they're coming back, Thoreau realized, well, I need men to listen to me, and I need food for them to listen to
Yeah.
me. So I need to stop where I have friends, Ireland. Except it was more aggressive than a friendly stop.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's a monument in Kerry to U-boats, like a U-boat crew.
Okay.
Because the U-boats used to just sail into Kerry and swap chocolate for coffee and stuff like that. Those had like a nice trading thing in World War II.
Mm.
Neutral Ireland.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's in the town where they filmed, or the production for the Star Wars films was based. So there's loads of like
Okay.
Darth Vader posters,
Hmm.
and then a monument to U-boat crews. It's a bit surreal to see.
Yeah, it's the evilest place in the world. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So what's the findings of your thesis then? The Irish Army, a good idea?
A good idea, a necessary idea if one is Anglo-Irish Protestant.
Yeah.
For the Catholics, it's just a continuation of everything they've been seeing previously. And the kind of the main thing has been that you need to consider Ireland separately from the British Army.
Mm-hmm.
The army in Ireland operates in a very unique dynamic, and if you remove that and just consider it as British military history in the 18th century, as most people do in the historical community, who are all bastards.
Yes, Andrew. Yes.
Yeah, they don't make that distinction, and I think doing so loses so much of the like nuance and anything. And then even if you're considering discussion of 18th century Irish society, the army is only really thought of as this brutal reactionary force. But if one looks at the soldier side of things, maybe there's a reason behind it, or maybe you can explain it a little bit more. So that's kind of the thrust of what the thesis says. And when it is turned into a book in about 25 years' time, I'm sure this podcast would be a great plug for that.
Absolutely, yeah. And then whoever you've got under your, whatever PhD students coming up under your candidacy.
Oh, I'm not getting a job in academia.
Oh, no?
Oh, it's so hard.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to become a successful comedian, and that says a lot.
Well, fair enough. Well, thanks a million. Have you got any questions you want to throw in?
Oh, we should do you have anything to plug?
No.
Where can we find your thesis?
You can find my thesis on my laptop and a hard disk, which is backed up. I do occasionally participate in a podcast called History Hack, which is we do these down the pub history debates. So history's worst something, or history's best something, and they're good fun. So that if you want more history shite, you can find me there, or on Twitter at Andrew Dorman, and if you want comedy side of things, at Andrew Dorman Comedy on Instagram.
Yes. Perfect.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thanks a million for coming on.
That was fun.
And also, to your credit, no notes. This was all literally just from memory.
Well, 4 years.
Yeah. It's still very impressive.
Still, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, cheers.
Yeah.
All right. Good luck.
Shafter.
Yeah.